Police pulled the sunken car to land, but what was waiting inside shocked everyone. It was early morning when two police officers were driving along the riverbank. The sun had just started to rise, and the sky was still a bit gray. Everything was quiet. The road beside the river was mostly empty, except for a few birds and the sound of water moving slowly. The officers were doing their regular patrol. It was something they had done many times before. They checked for anything strange, made sure no one was in trouble, and looked for signs of accidents. As they drove near a bend in the river, something caught their attention. At first, it looked like a shadow on the water. One of the officers slowed down the car. They looked closer. It was not a shadow. A dark shape was sticking out from under the water, not far from the edge. It was too large to be a log or a pile of branches. It had straight lines and a flat surface. They stepped out of the car and walked to the river's edge. When they got closer, they saw what it really was. A car roof was barely visible above the water. Mud and algae covered it, but the yellow paint still showed through. The color stood out, even under the dirt. It had been there for a long time. The officers knew this was serious. A car underwater meant there could have been an accident. It could also mean something worse. They radioed for help and marked the area so no one else would go near it. The officers looked at the car more closely. Only a small part of it was above the water, but they could tell it was an old model. The shape was familiar. One of them remembered something. He had seen that shape before in an old case file. He pulled out his phone and searched through the police system. A few minutes later, he found it. The car was a yellow Corvette, and there was only one like that reported missing in the area. It belonged to a man named George Kennedy. The name had not been spoken much in recent years, but it had once been well known. 5 years ago, George Kennedy had disappeared. He had been part of a police chase. That chase ended near this same river. The police had searched for days, but found nothing. George and his car were both gone, as if they had vanished in a thin air. The discovery of the car made the officers stop and think. It was likely the same vehicle. The shape, the color, and the location all matched. They took pictures and waited for the dive team to arrive. Word spread quickly, and other officers showed up to secure the area. The riverbank became busy. Yellow tape was put up, and people were told to stay back. The river's current had hidden the car for years. Mud and water plants had grown over it. Heavy rainstorms over the past few weeks may have shifted the riverbed, finally making the car visible again. It was a lucky accident that the officers had seen it that morning. A few feet in either direction, and they might have missed it. As more officers arrived, they made plans to remove the car from the water. It would not be easy. The car had been underwater for a long time. The frame might be weak, and they had to be careful not to damage anything important. A crane was called in, and divers were sent to check the area first. They needed to know how deep the car was and if it was safe to pull out. While waiting, the officers stood by the river, looking at the yellow roof sticking out. Some of them remembered the search from 5 years ago. It had been one of the biggest cases in town. People had come up with theories, and newspapers had printed stories. But over time, everyone had moved on. Now, the mystery had come back. No one knew what they would find inside. It could be just a car lost in the river, or it could be the key to a long-forgotten case. For now, all they had was a roof sticking out of the water, a name in an old report, and a feeling that this was not just a simple find. The officers stayed focused. They took notes, checked records, and waited for the team to begin the recovery. The sun rose higher, lighting up the yellow roof even more. It was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet. Something had changed. What started as a normal patrol now felt like the start of something much bigger. George Kennedy was once one of the most powerful men in town. People knew his name. His face was on billboards. He owned buildings, shops, and even a few factories. He dressed well, drove fancy cars, and held meetings in tall glass offices. From the outside, he looked like a successful businessman. But people who watched closely began to notice things that didn't add up. George had become rich very quickly. One year, he was an average man running a small car repair shop. A few years later, he owned half the block. He said it was because of smart investments. He claimed he bought land at the right time and sold it when prices went up. But rumors started to spread. People whispered that George had connections with dangerous people. Some believed he was involved in things that went beyond real estate and cars. There were stories about secret meetings at night. Some said they saw people entering George's building after midnight and leaving just before dawn. No one knew for sure what was happening, but it made people nervous. He never stayed long in one place. He kept moving his money. He bought properties under different names. Even his close workers said he was hard to trust. He smiled often, but something about him felt cold. George was also known to silence his enemies. People who questioned his business deals suddenly stopped speaking. A few left town. Others stayed quiet. Once, a young reporter tried to write about George's sudden rise. A week later, the newspaper dropped the story. The reporter never explained why. Some people said she was paid off. Others believed she was threatened. No one ever proved anything. Then there was the night everything changed. Police had been watching George for a while. They believed he was hiding something. He had been called in for questioning more than once, but always walked out with a smile. He said he had nothing to hide. But one night, things went too far. A witness had come forward with strong information. Police got a warrant and tried to arrest George. That night, George was seen leaving a party in his yellow Corvette. When the police tried to stop him, George didn't slow down. He hit the gas and drove off. What followed was one of the longest and wildest car chases the town had ever seen. The Corvette sped through the streets. Officers followed closely. Sirens filled the air. George knew the roads well. He took sharp turns, drove through alleys, and even sped through red lights. People stepped out of the way as the cars rushed by. The chase lasted for almost an hour. Then, near the river, George took a turn no one expected. His car disappeared down a narrow path. The officers lost sight of him. When they reached the end of the path, there was nothing there. Just the dark river and the sound of water. No car. No sign of George. It was like he had vanished. Police searched the area for days. They brought in divers. They looked through the woods. They even checked nearby towns. Nothing turned up. People guessed he had jumped into the river and swam away. Others believed he had a secret tunnel or escape plan. Some said he was dead, but no body was ever found. Over time, the case went cold. Files were stored away. George's name was no longer in the news. His buildings were sold off. His businesses closed. Some people said he had run away to another country. Others thought he had never left the town and was hiding somewhere. His face slowly disappeared from memory, but his story stayed alive in whispers and late-night talks. Many people were glad he was gone. Others were angry that he had escaped. A few still feared him. His past left a deep mark on the town. It was not just the money or the buildings. It was the fear, the lies, and the power he once held. Even after 5 years, people remembered the night of the chase. They remembered the sound of the Corvette speeding through the streets and the way it vanished without a trace. George Kennedy was more than a businessman. He was a mystery, a name tied to fear and questions. His past was full of shadows, and his disappearance left a hole no one could fill. The town moved on, but the story of George Kennedy never truly faded. The news about the car in the river spread fast. By the time the recovery team arrived, a small crowd had gathered near the riverbank. People stood behind the yellow tape, trying to get a better view. Some brought cameras. Others just stared in silence. The river, which had always looked calm and peaceful, now felt different. It was no longer just water. It was holding a secret. The recovery team brought large equipment. A crane was rolled in on a flatbed truck. Divers put on their suits and prepared to go into the water. Officers walked around, checking the area and keeping people back. The yellow roof of the car still poked out of the water, covered in mud and weeds. The current was slow that day, which helped the team plan their work. The divers entered the water first. They moved carefully, feeling their way around the sunken vehicle. It had been under for years, so they had to check if it was safe to move. The car was deep in the mud. Plants had grown over it, and small fish swam near the wreck. The divers tied heavy ropes around the car and gave the signal to the crane operator. Slowly, the crane began to lift the car. The crowd grew quiet. Mud poured off the sides as the Corvette rose from the water. Its windows were gone. The tires were half-rotted. Rust covered the metal. The car groaned and creaked as it left the water. A strong smell came with it, mud, oil, and decay. It was a sight no one there would forget. As the car reached the surface, more officers moved in. They placed it on a flat platform near the edge of the road. Water drained from its body. The interior was soaked and dark. The seats were torn. The dashboard was covered in grime. Years underwater had changed everything. It no longer looked like the fast, shiny car it once was. It looked like a ghost from the past. The officers began their search right away. They wore gloves and moved carefully. They knew any small item could be important. They opened the doors slowly. The hinges were stiff. Inside, they found only broken pieces. Old receipts, bits of cloth, empty containers. Nothing clear or useful. The trunk was empty. The glove box held nothing but soaked paper. The officers grew tired. The search felt like it was going nowhere. But Officer Jenna did not give up. She moved to the back seat and looked under it. The cushion was stuck, but she pushed harder. Her hand touched something hard. It felt like a box. She called the others. They helped lift the seat. Beneath it was a small metal box. It was covered in grime, but sealed tight. The box looked different from the rest of the car. It had no rust. It had no damage from water. It seemed built to survive. They carefully lifted it out and placed it on a clean surface. Everyone stared at it. It was heavier than it looked. No one knew what was inside, but it felt important. The crowd behind the tape could sense something had been found. People leaned forward, whispering and pointing. The officers said nothing. They wrapped the box and prepared to take it back to the station. For a moment, the riverbank went still. The Corvette, now fully out of the water, sat in silence. Its yellow paint faded, its body covered in scars. But the story it carried was far from over. The officers stood around it, tired but alert. They knew the car had not just been lost. It had been hiding, and now, after 5 long years, it had come back. The people slowly began to leave. The crane packed up. The divers changed out of their suits. The officers wrote reports and took more photos. The car was loaded onto a truck and covered with a tarp. It would be taken away for further study. But the box found under the seat was treated with more care. 2 officers held it closely as they walked to their car. They did not speak. They only nodded to each other. No one knew what the box would reveal. But one thing was clear. The Corvette had not been empty. It had been holding a secret all along. A secret that waited, buried in mud, until someone came looking. The sealed box found under the back seat of the Corvette was taken straight to the police station. It was handled with care. Officers placed it on a clean table in a secure room. Everyone knew it could hold something important. The outside of the box was metal, strong and heavy. It had no rust. Years in the river had done nothing to it. That meant it had been made to keep things safe from water and damage. The officers gathered around. They put on gloves and used tools to open it. The lid was tight, but it came loose with effort. Inside the box was only one item, a notebook. It looked old, but was not ruined. The waterproof seal had worked. The cover was black and plain. There were no names or marks on it. It looked simple, but the officers knew better than to judge it by appearance. They opened the notebook and flipped through the pages. There were no normal words at first. Page after page was filled with symbols, letters, and numbers. Some pages had patterns. Others had short lines with odd spacing. Some parts looked like codes. Others looked like maps or directions. The handwriting was neat, but the meaning was hidden. The officers could tell right away this was not a personal diary. It was not a list of names or phone numbers either. It looked like someone had gone to great lengths to keep its message secret. It felt like a puzzle made to protect something. The officers knew it was not just junk. It had been hidden in a safe box under a car seat for a reason. Someone had wanted to keep it away from others. They made copies of the pages and started to study them. A team was formed to work on the notebook. Officers, tech experts, and code analysts joined in. They used computers to scan the pages. They looked for patterns. They checked old files to see if any of the symbols matched known codes. It was slow work. Some pages had repeating symbols. Others had strange marks that looked like arrows or points on a line. Nothing made full sense at first. Each day, the team tried new methods. They looked at letter frequency. They tested different languages. They compared the codes to files from past cases. Some believed the symbols were used to hide names. Others thought they were dates or locations. It was hard to tell. Sometimes the team felt close to a breakthrough. Then the pattern would stop, and they would get stuck again. The work was tiring, but no one gave up. The officers believed the notebook had value. Something inside it had to explain why it was hidden so well. The more they studied, the more they noticed small clues. A few pages had smudges near certain symbols. Others had tiny dots or underlines that seemed to guide the eye. Slowly, they began to group the pages. Some seemed linked by layout, others by repeated marks. The team used software to break down the patterns. They tested codes used in past criminal cases. They checked for links to names, businesses, and places in the town's records. Each discovery gave them a little more hope. Even when some pages made no sense, the team kept going. They stayed late. They met every morning. They shared notes and ideas. They believed the notebook was not random. It had a message. They just had to find it. Some experts said the notebook showed signs of advanced planning. The writer had clearly known what they were doing. The symbols were not random. They followed rules. That meant someone had made a system. If the team could learn the system, they could read the message. Time passed, but the team worked harder. At first, the notebook had felt like a locked door. Now, it was beginning to open just a little. Small details started to make sense. Parts of the puzzle came together. The officers felt a change. They were not guessing anymore. They were following signs. They were starting to understand. The sealed box had seemed like a small find, but inside was a book that refused to give up its secrets. Every page was a step closer to something hidden. The team did not yet know what the full message was, but they knew they were getting closer. The notebook was no longer just strange symbols. It was a key waiting to be turned. The notebook sat open on the table. The pages were filled with symbols, lines, and codes. At first, none of it made sense, but the team kept working. They spent long days and nights studying each mark. They broke the work into small parts. Some officers worked on the numbers. Others focused on the shapes and lines. They used books, software, and old files to help them. Every clue mattered. One day, a small pattern appeared. A line of numbers matched dates from past events. The officers looked deeper. The dates were not random. They were tied to missing money, quiet deals, and secret meetings. With each new match, the notebook began to open up. More lines made sense. The symbols started to form names. Some pages were clear. Others still looked strange, but the team could now guess their meaning. The more they decoded, the more they learned. The notebook was not just a list. It was a full record of hidden work. It showed how money moved. It showed when and where meetings were held. It showed names of people who were part of the network. Some were expected. Others were shocking. The notebook gave full details. It had amounts of money, places, and even times. It looked like George had written everything down. Each page told a part of the story. There were pages about fake companies. There were pages showing where large sums of cash went. Some pages had street names and house numbers. The team used this to search for more records. They found matches in the system. Every time they checked, the notebook proved right. It was not guesswork. It was real. The team created a map on the wall. They used strings and notes to connect the people and places. The lines stretched from one corner to the other. Some names appeared many times, others only once. But every single one gave the officers a better picture of what had been hidden for years. The notebook also showed signs of care. George had made sure his notes were clear to him, but hard for others. He used fake names. He hid real details inside codes. He switched numbers and left out letters. But with each crack in the code, the officers found more. It felt like peeling back layers of a mask. Underneath was the full truth. One of the biggest surprises was a page with short initials. The initials matched known figures in law, business, and finance. The officers double-checked everything. The matches were strong. That meant people in trusted places were also involved. The notebook showed how deep the network went. It was not just small crimes. It was organized and careful. Some pages had instructions. They listed what to do if something went wrong. One page explained how to destroy files. Another gave steps to move money quickly. George had written these notes to protect himself, but now they worked against him. Every line gave more power to the case. The notebook also gave a timeline. It showed when things started and how they changed. At first, the deals were small, just a few names and short lines. But over time, the pages got fuller. The money grew. The names changed, but the work continued. This helped the team understand how George built his operation. It showed how fast it had grown and how long it lasted. The notebook was no longer just a mystery. It was a guide. It led the officers from one truth to the next. With each new fact, their case grew stronger. They collected extra records, talked to witnesses, and checked everything twice. The notebook was at the center of it all. It gave answers to old questions. It proved what many had only guessed. The team made sure to protect the notebook. They made several copies. They stored it in a locked room. Only a few people were allowed to see it. They knew how important it was. It was not just a list of crimes. It was the full story. It showed the plan, the people, and the path. The weeks of hard work had paid off. The pages once filled with mystery now spoke clearly. They told a story of lies, money, and power. The officers had cracked the code. What they found inside changed everything. Once the notebook was fully decoded, the officers had everything they needed to move forward. The names, dates, and locations gave them a clear picture of what had happened over the years. Among those pages were signs that George Kennedy was still alive. The clues pointed to places far away from the town. The notes showed travel records, money transfers, and signs of movement across borders. The team focused on those clues. They worked with other departments and shared what they had found. The files were strong. The evidence was detailed. But they needed help. George was no longer in the country. He had used false names and fake IDs. He had crossed borders quietly and had started a new life somewhere else. The officers contacted international police. They shared copies of the notebook and explained the case. The international team reviewed everything and agreed to help. They began tracking the names and bank accounts listed in the notebook. The money trail led them to one country, then another. It was clear that George had planned everything. He moved often and used others to protect him. The officers followed every clue. They studied passport records and travel documents. They checked flight data and hotel stays. One step at a time, they got closer. The more they looked, the more signs they found. George had stayed in small towns and large cities. He had changed his look and name. But he made mistakes. Small ones. Each mistake left a trace. One clue stood out. A series of payments to a private villa near the coast of a foreign country. The name used matched one of the fake names in the notebook. The team sent a request for help to that country's police. The local officers moved fast. They set up quiet surveillance near the villa. After a few days, they spotted a man who looked like George. He was older now. His hair was shorter, and he wore glasses. But his face still matched the photo in the police file. The local police kept watching. They checked his routine. He stayed inside most of the day. He had guards and cameras. But he did not know he had been found. The arrest was planned carefully. Officers from both countries worked together. They made a plan that was quick and quiet. Early in the morning, the local police entered the villa. George was taken by surprise. He did not fight. He did not speak. He was arrested and taken into custody. The officers confirmed his identity through fingerprints. It was him. News of the arrest spread quickly. Reporters picked up the story. George Kennedy, once thought dead, had been found. Photos of the villa were shared online. People were shocked. The town that had once feared him now saw his face on every screen. Some people felt relief. Others were angry that he had lived in comfort for so long. George was held in that country while paperwork was prepared. The legal process took time. Documents had to be signed and reviewed. After several weeks, he was approved for return. He was placed on a flight under guard and brought back to face justice. When the plane landed, cameras were already waiting. Reporters stood outside the airport. Police cars lined the road. George was taken to a secure location. He did not speak to anyone. He kept his head down, but everyone saw him. The man who had vanished was now back in handcuffs. The officers who had worked the case were praised. They had started with a simple patrol and followed every clue. The team that cracked the notebook was honored. The work had been hard, but had paid off. George's return marked a major moment in their careers. The town reacted in different ways. Some people remembered the fear. Others remembered the silence that followed his escape. But now, the man behind it all was back. And this time, there was no place left to hide. George was placed in a holding cell. A court date was set. The officers continued to prepare. They gathered all the files, records, and statements. Everything they needed was ready. The next step would be in the courtroom. The trial of George Kennedy became one of the most important cases the town had ever seen. It was held in a large courtroom with high walls and wide windows. The seats filled up quickly each day. Reporters lined the front steps. Cameras stayed outside. Inside the building, people waited quietly as the case began. Some had come for justice. Others came out of curiosity. Everyone wanted answers. The officers had spent weeks preparing for this moment. Every piece of evidence was ready. The notebook, once filled with strange codes, had now been fully translated and organized. The team had turned the pages into clear facts. They had created charts, lists, and timelines. Every page from the notebook was placed in the right order. It showed when the crimes happened, how they were done, and who was involved. George sat in the courtroom and listened. He wore a plain suit and did not speak. His lawyers tried to push back, but the evidence was strong. The notebook was at the center of everything. It showed money transfers, fake names, and secret meetings. It even showed how George had avoided the police and moved through different countries. The court could see that the crimes had been planned and well organized. Witnesses were called to the stand. Some spoke about the night of the chase. Others spoke about missing money, strange meetings, or past threats. Everything pointed back to George. The courtroom stayed silent during each new piece of information. Even the smallest details added weight to the case. The judge listened carefully. The jury took notes and asked questions. The officers who had worked the case also gave statements. They explained how they found the car, how the notebook was hidden, and how they cracked the code. They spoke clearly and shared facts. The judge thanked them for their hard work. Many people in the room were surprised at how much the team had uncovered. The notebook itself was shown in court. A special copy was made for the trial. Each page was displayed on a screen for everyone to see. The jury looked at the symbols and codes. Then they saw the decoded version. The names, numbers, and addresses were now easy to understand. There was no doubt that George had written it. His handwriting had been confirmed by experts. His fingerprints were also found on the pages. The final day of the trial arrived. The courtroom was full. People stood outside waiting for news. The jury took a short time to decide. They returned with a clear decision. George was found guilty. The judge gave him a life sentence. There would be no chance for early release. The crimes were too many and too serious. The sentence was final. After the trial, the town reacted. Some people cried. Others cheered. Many were simply quiet, trying to understand what it all meant. For years, George Kennedy had been a mystery. Now the truth was out. He had been hiding crimes behind a mask of wealth and success. His fall was complete. The officers who worked the case were praised. They were invited to speak at meetings and events. Local leaders thanked them for not giving up. Their hard work had brought justice. What started as a small patrol near the river had turned into a major discovery. The sealed box, the notebook, and the long hours of decoding had all led to this moment. The town slowly returned to normal. People talked less about George as time went on, but the memory of the case remained. It became part of the town's history. The courtroom, once full of noise, became quiet again. The notebook was stored in a secure place. It would be kept as part of the case record. The riverbank where the Corvette was found also changed. A small sign was placed there. It told the story of the day the car was pulled from the water. It reminded people that truth can stay hidden for a long time, but it can still be found. It also reminded them of the officers who followed every clue. In the end, justice was served. The town got answers. George faced the law, and the officers showed that even the smallest discovery can lead to something big.